me share my heart with you for a couple of Sundays. When our world, and I talk about our personal world, when our personal world is shaken, when we have to call an ambulance, when there's a police car in front of our house, when there are fire engines in the street, when we get a call at 2 a.m., when the doctor's office and calls with the results of the test, when somebody says, I want a divorce and I want out, when you lay in bed at night and you hear mom and dad fighting, yelling at one another, our mind can race with thoughts. And our mind can take us to very dark places in life. And our world becomes so shaken, and it becomes so scary. And we have a sense in our head and in our heart that there's supposed to be a God that either prevents this stuff from happening or is supposed to show up and help us when it's happening. And you know, this is common not only to people who would profess a relationship with Jesus. I mean, this is common to all of us. All of us have that sense of a shakenness when our world is turned upside down and we don't know what's going to happen. And it's scary. It's the fear of the unknown. It's when our world is turned upside down, and maybe somewhere, somehow, in some kind of words, we've all asked the question, where is God when it hurts? And all of us in this room have asked that question, and you might think that others don't ask that question. You might think you're the only one that asks that question. And if you've asked that question, you're certainly not alone. In fact, we're going to read a portion of the Bible where the author of this part of the Bible actually asks the very same question. He wanted to know where God was when it hurts. The man's name is Asaph. It really doesn't matter, but he puts his name to this whole thing, which I think is great. His name is Asaph. And Asaph wondered, where is God when life hurts? He is so transparent in what he is going to write. I'm just going to go through a psalm with you. Psalm number 73. The Psalms are found right just towards the middle of your Bible. If you brought the paper version, you can about open it right in the middle, and it's almost right there. And if you scroll there, however you want to get there in your version of the Bible, Psalm 73. And in Psalm 73, verse number 1, look what he says. We'll put it up here on the screen for you. Look what he says. Truly, God is good to Israel, to those whose hearts are pure. At that point in time, you might read that one verse and just check out because you can't really identify with Israel and you're not always sure that your heart is so pure. Well, if you kind of pull back from that verse because you don't think of yourself as being pure, well, you're very much like the author who wrote this psalm. It sounds really good at this point. As you start out this psalm, it sounds great. But the psalmist here, he kind of begins with the ending of his story. He puts the conclusion of his story at the very beginning. Now here's the real story. Look what he says in the next verse, verse number 2. But as for me, maybe this was you. I almost lost my footing. My feet were slipping. I was almost gone. It seems like the guy who wrote this says that what he heard about God wasn't lining up with the circumstances of life. I'd heard that God was supposed to be this powerful God that came through with all kinds of miracles, and he parts the Red Sea for the Israelites, and Jesus can calm the waves of the water and make miracles happen and blind eyes open, and he can heal all kinds of people. But when I look at my life right now, it just doesn't look like that at all. And so I doubted God. The thinking of the time, and maybe you think this way as well, the thinking of the time that Asaph lived was this. The good things happened to good people. Consequently, bad things happened to bad people, and right now bad things were happening in Asaph's life, so he must be bad. If we could kind of say it this way, it's, when you're Johnny Christian, he's supposed to score the winning touchdown. And the whole crowd cheers and goes wild. And Peter Pagan, he fumbles the ball and loses the game. And Asaph, he writes just so transparently that this is the way he thought. And then what Asaph does, I think where Asaph kind of gets tripped up is he started to look at his neighbors. You've done that and I've done that. When you're in the deepest, darkest places in your life, you start to look at the lives of other people and you wonder, why does everything work out for them? And that's what Asaph does. He looks at his neighbors and everything seems to be going well for them. And what makes it even more irritating is this: they don't even go to church. And you're here this morning, you're at the early service this morning, and you had to fight with your family, and the kids were arguing, and they couldn't find their socks, and we got to get out the door, and just all of the melee that goes along with getting to church on Sunday morning. And you're driving to church, and all you can think of is how wonderful it must be for all these people who aren't going to church, and they're still tucked in their cozy, warm beds, sitting in their bathrobes, sipping their cup of coffee. You got to go to church. You drive by these people's homes, and they're not in church. And you know what? They have a bigger home. They got nicer cars. They get a better career. The wife is prettier. Kids have straight teeth. I mean, just everything works so well for them. So he says this. He's so transparent. Look what he says in verse number 3. Verse 3. I envied the proud when I saw them prosper despite their wickedness. In other words, I looked at the people that have no reverence for God whatsoever, and I wanted what they have. It seems like everything just works for them, and they don't work anything for God. So I envied that. Verse number 4, they seem to live such painless lives. Their bodies are so healthy and strong. He's saying, you know what? Their life is beautiful, and they're beautiful. Everything's just so beautiful for them. Verse 5, they don't have troubles like other people. You could pause right there and say they don't have troubles like I have troubles. They're not plagued with problems like everyone else. Let's just be honest, it wasn't everyone else. It was, they don't have problems like I have problems. I don't know if you've ever had a pity party before. And I'm not sure who came up with the term pity party. Because every time I go to a pity party, I'm the only one there. And I'm thinking a party would be a lot more fun with more people. Verse 6. They wear pride like a jeweled necklace. They clothe themselves with cruelty. In other words, instead of being ashamed of the character flaws that they have, they just wear them proudly. They really don't care. They would say, these people that he's envious of, the people that don't go to church, Asaph would say something of them. They would say, I got here by my own hard work. Nobody helped me out in life. And the reason I live in a big house and drive a nicer car and have a better career and everything, I worked to get here. It's almost as if these people about whom Asaph is writing, they understand the geometry of life, that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and I'll walk right over whoever I have to get to where I'm going to be. And I really don't care about the consequences. Asaph is bothered by that kind of an attitude. In fact, he says in verse 9, he says this, he says, they boast against the very heavens, and their words strut throughout the earth. These are the bold, arrogant type that seem to still get all kinds of recognition no matter where they go. Oh, they're the ones that are applauded and get the plaque at the charity ball, and their pictures in the newspaper, and it just seems like everything they touch turns to gold, but they never touch God or go into church. Verse 10, and so the people around them, well, they're dismayed and they're confused, drinking in all their words. And I think what Asaph is saying is, you know what, the rest of the world looks at these people who seem to have everything going so well for them in their life. And they understand there's character flaws. They understand they're not godly people. They understand that, in fact, they might even be immoral people, but everything just seems to work for them, so they must be right. It's almost as if this psalm was torn right from the pages of our culture. He says of these people in verse number 11, these people say to themselves, "What does God know?" they ask. "Does the Most High even know what's happening?" It's as if God and church and religion are so disconnected from the realities of life. What does God know about what's happening on planet Earth? I'm just going to live my life the way I want to live it. Asaph is so revealing about his thought life. And maybe you have been in such a low spot in your life that you have thought the same thing as he says in that verse right there. What does God know? God has no clue what's going on in my life. God is so far away. He's so disconnected from where I am right now. And then Asaph kind of asks himself a question. I think it's a question that you and I have asked privately. Verse 13, look what he says. Did I keep my heart pure for nothing? Did I keep myself innocent for no reason? And you know, he's saying, really, is it really worth it to serve God? I mean, driving to church on Sunday morning. These godless people, look at the home they live in. Look at the lifestyle they lead. They don't profess any relationship with God. They're not trying to be moral people or do the right thing, and I'm trying to do it, and it just seems like it always works out for them, and it doesn't work out for me. I wonder if it's really worth it at all. And this is where a lot of people get tripped up in their faith. In fact, Jesus even told a parable about this. You could read it sometimes, and he talked about a farmer planting seed, and some seed fell in good soil, and some fell amongst the rocks. And in this story, Jesus said, some people get really excited about God, but when the difficulties of life come up, they just kind of say, well, God, I guess that didn't work. God didn't work, and so I'm done with this. Asaph kind of asks himself if this is really all worth it. You've thought that, and I've thought that. Verse 15, he says, you know what, if I had really spoken this way, though, to other people, I would have been a traitor to your people. In other words, I wouldn't dare say to other people what I'm thinking in my mind. And I bet you can relate to that. If people really knew how I thought sometimes about God, they would really wonder if I'm a God follower at all. We've all thought those thoughts. And somewhere, Asaph finally, he decides, I got to get out of this pit of pity. And Asaph kind of gets a hold of the faith that he had. Look what he says in verse 16. I tried to understand why the wicked prosper. What a difficult task it is. We look around, we look at culture, and we look at the people that are beautiful and have lots of money, and just everything they touch seems to turn to gold. And don't we sometimes wonder, why does it work for them? But it doesn't work for me. I don't know. I guess I'm just not going to figure it out, Asaph says. But he found his answer finally. And the psalm that he's writing here for us kind of turns the corner in verse number 17. Look what he says in 17. Then I went into your sanctuary, O God, and I finally understood the destiny of the wicked. Asaph finally gets to church, and he starts to ponder the life of the people that he's wondering about. And he reconnects with God, and when he reconnects with God, his perspective of life and of people and of himself changed completely. And that's what happens at church when we hurt. When we hurt and we come into the church, we can change our perspective. If you've ever wondered, why does the pastor want us to shout and scream and holler and clap and sing and all that emotional stuff that us Norwegians just don't do? It's because I think this is a great place to be encouraged. I think that's why we do that. But for some people, and not you because you're here at the early service, church is a poor substitute for a Sunday activity. I mean, we could go to church and sit through some boring old sermon and sing some old antiquated songs, or we could go camping, we could go boating, we could go on a little weekend retreat, we could have a little getaway, we could go to a sporting event with our family, and there's a lot of things that we could do on Sunday instead of going to church. And while we're at some of these activities, while we're out camping, and while we're on a vacation, while we're on a trip, while we just stay at home and decide we're just going to have family time today and worship God here. But you won't worship God there, will you? You won't worship God from the boat. And you won't worship God on your little family getaway. You won't worship God on your camping trip, will you? And so we put off church. But Asaph didn't. Asaph said, you know what, I finally understood the destiny of the wicked. In other words, Asaph said, I finally got a long-range view of the future of the people that I've been complaining about. All of us in this room, we kind of have a long-range view. We have a view of our past. There are historical figures. There's memories that we have. So we kind of have a long-range view of our past, and we've got a view of our future. Well, on your phone or on your wall, you've got a calendar, and you mark dates, and you look forward to things. And so you kind of have a long-range view of your future as well. And when you compare the two, you can kind of balance the past and the future against the present. If you have a dog or a cat, they can't do that. Your dog has no long-range view. You have a long-range view, and when you have a long-range view, you can sit down with your children or your grandchildren, and you can share your life experience with them to kind of help launch them. I don't think a cat gathers her little kittens around and says, now, let me tell you about what us cats have learned for generations and generations. I'm going to pass it on to you. Your dog or your cat, all they can think about is the food that's in their dish right now and the next mouthful. That's about the longest range of view they have. But it's different for you and me. And when Asaph got an understanding of all of this, he discovered that things really aren't all that great for his neighbors. When Asaph finally got a grip of the long-range view of his life and their life, he discovered what you and I know, but we don't always feel. That all of the people in our lives and all the people in the world and all the people in our media that are beautiful and life is beautiful, there's things that happen behind the closed doors of their lives as well. And media loves to get a hold of those little morsels and nuggets of those private lives and put them out there for you and I to read. Asaph says in verse 18, truly you put them on a slippery path, and you send them sliding over the cliff to destruction. Once again, in other words, they have problems too. There are consequences, natural consequences for the choices that they make in life. He says in verse 19, in an instant they're destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. Asaph was kind of having a pity party. He gets to church that day. He starts to think about God and worship God. His perspective changes. His outlook changes. Verse 21, then I realized that my heart was bitter and I was all torn up inside. I was so foolish and ignorant. I must have seemed like a senseless animal to you. Seems like harsh terminology, but I think the reason he says senseless animal is because an animal only thinks about life in the moment, not the past and not the future. You know, when we are hurting, when we hurt physically, emotionally, spiritually, circumstantially, let's just be honest, when we are really hurting and our life is tipped upside down and our world is turned upside down, our long-range view is about as long as the duration of the pain we can bear. We just think about the moment. We're just thinking about today. I hurt right now, and I can't think about a better future. But Asaph did. And when we hurt, the only length of time we see is the length of our pain. So the question is, Pastor, I don't know if you've really answered the question yet. Where is God exactly when it hurts? Asaph answers the question for us so beautifully. Look what he says in verse 23. I still belong to you. You hold my right hand. In other words, God, I just realized you haven't gone anywhere. You're right here. You haven't gone anywhere. When you hurt, let's just be honest. When you hurt and life hurts and life is painful and life is difficult and you're confused and you don't know what to do, you don't care in that moment about your salvation. You're not thinking, I'm so glad to be saved. You just want to somewhere reach your hand up and feel God's presence right there with you. That's what matters to you more than anything else. You just want to know that He's close by. I had the privilege in the last church that we pastored, a small town, 6 blocks from our house to the school. Walked my son to school every morning until he started driving. And especially in those younger years, grade school years. You remember grade school, don't you? You'd like to forget many of those years, perhaps. And I still remember the gratifying feeling that at some point along that journey, walking with my son, that little cold hand would make its way up and find mine. And we'd hold hands as we walked. And I can only imagine in that moment the feeling for a child when you're feeling like you're walking to unsafe places like a school, to know that your dad is with you. When you're walking through the things in life that hurt, just reach up and know that God's hand is right there. And as a result, in verse 24, he says this, you guide me with your counsel, leading me, I love this, to an average destiny, to a mediocre destiny, to a so-so future. I love it. To a glorious destiny. I love it, a glorious destiny. Is it possible that your present pain is the pathway to a future blessing? Absolutely. Is it possible that what you're enduring right now is a pathway to something so amazing you can't see it? And that's what it is to walk with God. We walk by faith. It's not okay, but it's going to be okay. It's not okay, but it's going to be okay. It's not okay, but it's going to be okay. You lead me to a glorious destiny. Right now, your presence, your present world seems like a difficult place. I'm telling you, God hasn't gone anywhere. Maybe you have. I love this. An old saint in this church said to me years ago with his raspy, hoarse voice. I was probably 20-something when he said, Brother Chris, I just want you to remember when you're a Christian, every day is a great day. And when things are going well, it's a double great day. Isn't that true? It's good. Verse 26. My health may fail. True. And my spirit might grow weak. True. But God remains the strength of my heart. He is mine forever. True. True. This verse is tied to the first verse that we started out with, in verse number 1. In verse number 1, he says, God is amazing, and He's great, and He's good to those of pure heart. And then Asaph takes us into his mind, and he reveals so transparently, he's so vulnerable to us with the thoughts that we all think from time to time. And when he kind of works through the whole thing, life is miserable, but then he gets into the presence of God. Maybe it's not that bad. He kind of comes back to this whole thing that God is still faithful. He's still there. He found some value in being in church that day and just being close to God. And this is what I love. In fact, Asaph was a choir director. He was on staff at LifeChurch. He worked in the church. And on the way to church that day, I think he's probably having a fight with his wife. Kids were yelling in the back seat. Junior just stuck gum to the back of your seat. Somebody tipped over their formula, dropped their drink, mashed a bag of cookies. It was just a miserable trip to church. You're probably thinking, I wonder if Pastor was in my car this morning. And he got to church, and he got into the presence of God, and he got a hold of God, and he drove home a happy man. You know, that day I think Asaph drove home from church, and the neighbor's house was still the same size. Still had the same cars in the parking lot, and the RV is there, and the boats are there, and all the toys are there, and beautiful children out front, and a beautiful wife on the porch, and everything was great. Nothing had changed, but he changed. And suddenly he realized, you know what, I think I'm better off than all these people after all. Verse 27, those who desert him will perish, for you destroy those who abandon you. In other words, he just realized, you know what, there's consequences to living separate from God. And they'll deal with those consequences at some point in life. But right now I see the consequences of being faithful to God. Verse 28, but as for me, I'm not looking at my neighbors anymore. I'm not looking what everybody else has and what I don't have. As for me, how good it is to be where? Near God. How good it is for me to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my shelter, and I will tell everyone about the wonderful things you do. You know what I love about this? This story is about you and me. Going to church, he was crabby, moody, envious, just a grump. How many came to church with that? No, put your hand down. Coming home, he's a happy man. Because he realized, as he thought about this, where is God when life hurts? And I think Asaph came to this conclusion. He's right here. He's been here. Wherever you are, that's where here is. Wherever you are, that's where here is. It doesn't matter where you go, and you'd say, where is God? He's right here. In fact, Scripture tells us he's as close as the mention of his name. When you hurt, don't look around. When you hurt, don't look within. When you hurt, just look up.